Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is my 1968 Dodge Charger. Not to be confused with my 1969 Dodge Charger, although frankly, I'm not sure how you could do that. It's been over 2 years now since I bought this thing in Bend, Oregon, and drove it home over 300 miles. Since then, I've made various improvements. I've mostly used it as a sunny weekend cruiser, but it has done some daily driver duty as well. It was my dream car. It's the one I always wanted. Although I figured it would have a black top and black interior. It's far from perfect, but it is in remarkably good shape. Now, of course, I've done a bunch of videos on this car since I got it. The last big one was an engine compartment restoration, where I cleaned everything up in here, went back to factory points ignition, a factory numbers correct-ish coil, cleaned everything up, painted the engine the correct turquoise color, changed out the radiator for that one, which we'll get to in a minute, and just generally made it look nicer under here. I got rid of all the horrible 90s speed shop braided steel garbage and just generally improved things a lot. I really haven't driven this car much in the last year. In fact, the last big trip I took it on was a drive to Graham, Washington for Sunbust. That was in August of last year, I think. On that trip, this radiator puked its guts out twice because, as it turns out, it's a total piece of garbage. That's the original taken out of our 1966 Coronet station wagon when we did the 440 swap. It had a leak, which I had repaired by a radiator shop years ago, but the repair was never all that good, and at this point, it dribbles pretty well. So what I did was, I installed it for looks, and then I cut the lower seal out of that radiator cap to depressurize the cooling system. That helps prevent it from blowing coolant out of the leak, but it also lowers the boiling point of your coolant. And what happens is, as that coolant heats up, it just kind of pisses out the overflow and leaves giant lakes under the car. That's what happened last time I drove it, which was all the way back in like July. When I installed that radiator, I knew it leaked. And I knew I would have to replace it sooner or later. So today, I have finally come up with a fix for this. And by come up with a fix for this, I mean I finally spent some of my hard-earned YouTube dollars on a new radiator for the car. I really wanted to find an original, correctly numbered radiator to put in this thing, even if I needed to have it record. But I've had no luck with that, so I went for a different option. If you hop on eBay and search for your classic car and aluminum radiator, you're liable to find multiple options that look kind of like this. Generic, square, plain aluminum. It's nice enough, I guess. If you're into the modern look, fine, but I'm not. I much prefer a radiator that looks original. And that's why I'm going to have the matching original radiator for Dale's Demon record for a future engine compartment restoration on this car. There are multiple brands that sell generic modern type aluminum radiators like this. Champion and Cold Case are two that come to mind. The generic boxy aluminum look just does not do it for me, especially on this Charger, when I've just done all that work restoring the engine compartment. And that is why I didn't install this one. Well, that, and it's also too large. And also the lower radiator hose is on the wrong side, but that's another story. That's where this comes in. This is a factory appearing aluminum radiator. It's designed specifically to mimic the look of the original. Now, of course, it doesn't have a Pentastar on it or a part number, and it doesn't say use Mopar antifreeze, use Mopar rust resistor, whatever the heck it is, but it looks right. It's been quite some time now since we installed one of these in Don's 1967 Coronet 500 convertible. The idea was to see if it was actually any good. Does it fit well? Does it work? Yeah, seems to. So ever since then, I figured I'd buy one for this car. It's been in a tab on my phone for like almost a year now. And finally, this month, I decided to go ahead and buy one. It's a good thing too, because when I clicked over to that listing, it showed there was only one left. So if you want to go buy one for yourself, I apologize, but you might have a bad time. Changing a radiator. Step 1, empty one of your coolant drains. Which it turns out is easier said than done. Why? Why is even a simple operation a horrible, messy nightmare? I am fully prepared to burn this shop to the ground and like take up fishing or something. I don't even like fish. Well, that's where I left that. One forever later, I'm going to back the car out of the shop because if I try to do it right here, I'm going to hit my head 1,000 times and I might not even be able to fit the radiator out under the hood. Aside from a goofy hot starting problem, because big block, this thing has always been super reliable. But as with anything else that sits for months at a time, you do have to crank it until fuel reaches the carburetor. Well, that wasn't so bad. Hey, remind me to check the transmission fluid level. Of course, I'm going to have to add transmission fluid anyway because we're going to lose however much is sitting in this cooler. All right, step 2 or whatever is remove the radiator cap, stare into the abyss, and realize the paint's flaking off of your valve cover. You know, the paint on the block is terrible, but I actually tried to do a nice job on these, so that's really disappointing. If you own a big block Chrysler, it leaks oil, so this is your bi-weekly reminder to go check your valve cover bolts. They're probably loose. Hashtag cork gasket things. Trust me though, it beats the alternative. Step 3 in changing your classic Mopar's radiator. Change the radiator. It's not hard. I've got it piddling out of the drain down there at a relatively low speed so it doesn't go all over my sway bar. It's gonna take a little bit to drain, but thankfully, because this thing exploded coolant everywhere, the upper hose is already empty, so I'll go ahead and unhook that. The radiator itself is held to the car with 4 7/16 hex bolts, at least if your radiator configuration is factory it should be. Note, there is no fan shroud. Now I do want to add one. Thankfully, the correct one for this year car is the multi-piece metal unit. There are nuts that pop in here and then straps and then the 2 halves of the shroud. So I'm gonna install one of those, let's say later. I like the horrible screaming noises. I know I've explained before that this isn't a factory restoration. It's just kind of a nice factory-ish underhood restoration. But I did go ahead and delete some more nonsense that doesn't belong there because it was bothering me. This is a battery disconnect, which I don't use. I just take the negative cable off. It's really easy. Funny story, attached to that disconnect, a body ground, and it's on the battery side, which means even with this taken off, the battery was still grounded. That's just dumb. Also, that's dumb. The body ground for these cars, before 1970 anyway, is back here. It goes from the head to the firewall, and that's the only one there should be. There are grounds for lighting on this screw, but there's nothing here off of battery negative. It's not that extra grounds are a bad thing, they certainly aren't, but in this case, that one was ugly, and I decided it was unnecessary. I put a standard use terminal on here that I had laying around. While I'm thinking about it, I wanted to show you that cap I was talking about. Note this section of the lower seal that's cut out. This is a pressure cap. It's designed to vent above a certain pressure, and the pressure on this one was 16 pounds. By doing this, you essentially remove any pressure from the system because coolant, as it heats up and tries to pressurize, has a path to get out of the radiator. If you're stuck somewhere on the side of the road with a coolant leak, cutting the lower seal in your cap, like this, and then filling your engine with water may be a reliable way to get off of the side of the road without blowing all that new coolant right back out. I don't recommend doing this and then leaving it that way for years. The radiator's done piddling through the drain valve, but that doesn't mean we're done. Oh, no, it means the drain valve's plugged full of goo. Okay, more waiting. While I'm waiting, I decided I should probably cover a couple things that seem to confuse people. First, the color of this engine. In 1968, turquoise was the only color you could have on a big block, even an RT with a 440. It would not be orange. It would be turquoise. The 440 would be orange for 1969. Also, although this thing is wearing a 383 Magnum Pi tin, it's actually an original 383 two-barrel low compression engine. This mostly orange throttle return spring maddened people in that quote-unquote restoration video because I left it orange. I left it orange because it's supposed to be green and orange. This one has been on this engine for a long time. It was actually here when this thing was painted dark blue before it was painted orange. What I need to do is finish scraping all this orange paint off. When they're factory correct, they're all green with an orange stripe somewhere, and I don't know if that's still going to be under there or not. I got most of the orange off, but of course, in a lot of places, it took the green with it. Guess I need to paint this, but I don't have any green paint because why would I? It's still going. So while I wait, I guess we can discuss the next part of this that really does kind of suck. Transmission cooling lines. Now, of course, I had to bend these to get them to line up with this radiator after they'd previously been bent to line up with the 26. The most annoying part of this, of course, is the fittings will spin in the radiator. They are screwed in. You need to use a 1/2-inch hex wrench to hold the fitting in place and a 5/8 hex wrench to unscrew the line. Once the lines are off, Fluid's gonna come out, so that'll be fun, especially with an antifreeze drain in the way, and I don't really want to mix the two. And then those fittings have to be taken out and installed in the new radiator. Well, I sure wish I'd realized this sooner. Apparently this water pump's on borrowed time, which is really common. I keep seeing that on big blocks. I'd love to change it, and also this entire stupid aluminum water pump housing, so I can get my coolant temp sensor in the right location, and it'll look right. And of course the alternator bracket is still a goofy chrome one, which I spray painted. And spray paint doesn't stick to goofy chrome, so that's starting to look like garbage. Oh, also this alternator makes noise. That's the original demon part. I'm gonna need that back soon. With the dribbling from the drain finally stopped, it's time to loosen the lower hose. And inevitably, there will be a bunch more coolant in there, so be ready for that. I got the cooling lines off, and now I'm just about ready to lift this radiator out of here. Now, if you don't know, it's held in place with 4 bolts, as I mentioned, but the bottom 2 don't have to come out. They can just kind of hang out there, and the radiator sits on top of them. That really aids reinstallation. Of course, I'm missing one on this side. For some reason, the original nut insert thingy is just gone. 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Of course, the 3 out of 4 thing only works if your 3 bolt holes line up, so that's great. You know, a commenter criticized my constant use of sarcasm the other day, to which I can only respond, if that's a problem for you, you are on the wrong channel. Oh, wow. Lightly bending the bracket out by hand actually worked. Also, important note, these are not the right bolts. They're almost the right bolts, but they're supposed to have bigger washers. Radiator is fully installed, except the upper hose is loose, and I've got the guts of the thermostat cocked over to the side, so I can pre-fill this cooling system, watch the level come up to the thermostat. Once it reaches there, I'll put it back in, secure that hose, and finish filling it up. Because this system doesn't have an overflow tank, the coolant only goes up to just above the top of the fins in the radiator there. That way there's room for heat expansion. As this thing warms up, the coolant should grow to fully fill the radiator. If you get it a little bit too high for the first heat cycle or 3, you'll lose a little bit out the overflow hose, but eventually it should stop doing that. Believe it or not, I actually own a fancy coolant funnel that gaskets to the radiator. Super useful for burping cooling systems and stuff. But I pretty much refuse to use that, ever. Especially on these classic cars where it's so easy to just let the air out somewhere. I don't use a funnel at all to pour coolant. I'm a master, or something approaching a master, of the waterfall technique. What happened to my hair? Ugh, this is bad. Glug glug. Notice I haven't missed a drop. Sometimes the bottles will burp if you get too excited about pouring, and then it'll just make a horrible mess for you. One down. Here's the technique for this. The thermostat is open, my light is jammed in there, and I can just see the coolant level coming up. Another splash, it'll be touching the thermostat, then I'll pop the thermostat back in. Note, having this hose loose is not at all a problem to this point. This is just here to prevent splash, essentially. And there you go. That's pretty close. Might need topped up after a heat cycle or 2. Now I could have gone to the parts store and grabbed a new radiator cap, but instead, I stole a seal off a goofy aftermarket one that I had in the pile and fixed this original Pentastar unit. I prefer that. With that installed, we're ready for a test run, or at least a leak check. And to put the wagon radiator back in the pile, so I can be disappointed by it again in the future. God, I love this thing. Needs a bath. Again. So far, so good. Transmission fluid is not actually low, although it does appear to be somewhat aerated, which is interesting. Usually that should only happen if the filter is like falling off, or has a bad O-ring, or if it's massively overfull, which it definitely isn't. Anyway, I guess it's just like that. Other than having to snug that clamp with a tool, because it was tight and yet still leaking, no issues. I wonder how many people will comment on this video to tell me that that is totally unsafe and insane. I bet at least a few. I did take the liberty of retorquing the lug nuts, because these are unilug wheels and I have it on authority that they will try to kill me at some point. And I aired up the tires. They were all a little bit low, probably because it just sits here all the time. I do need to go through the dash on this thing at some point. The clock is dead, which is irritating. The temperature gauge doesn't work. The fuel gauge works, but it only reads at like a full tank, which is here, and then a half tank is there, and where you see it now is where it spends most of the time under that. The oil gauge works though. The alternator gauge, as it's labeled in this car, or ammeter, it doesn't really work because I put in a shunt wire. It would be nice to fix those things and reinstall my dash fader thingy. Woo! See? Told you it works. Recall, if you will, my Mercury Capri video from like a few weeks ago. I was criticizing the handling of that car, and many people said, well, it's 45 years old. Yeah, well, this one's 56 years old, and it's not total garbage. That one wasn't me. Just saying, I didn't do that. There's just nothing like cruising this thing on a nice, sunny, but kind of cool evening like this with the windows down. It's almost like having a convertible, but also not like having a convertible, which is good because I kind of like wearing hats. I'd like to catch these people one of these days. Just maddening. Anyway, the good news is, I think it's fixed. There's no coolant pouring out of it. Doesn't seem to be running hot. Not that I'd ever know that. I've got the dust knocked off it again, and it looks as great as ever. It does still smell like burning oil, but yeah, big block Chrysler. I think I'm gonna go ahead and drive this thing up to Rocket tomorrow. What could possibly go wrong? You know I love the 383. It's no crazy powerhouse or anything, but it is plenty fun in a car like this. Oh yeah. This thing handles great too. I'm not joking when I say that. This is stock suspension, stock sway bar. Nothing special. And the disc brakes aren't bad either. Whee! Stay. Oh yeah, people keep asking me when I'm gonna start on that one. Maybe never, but definitely a long time from now if it happens at all. If you want to own a Charger that looks like that, but comes with a bunch of AMD sheet metal and no legal ownership documentation and costs a lot of money, let me know. Live, damn you! Yay! A bunch of people told me that this car looked red. There you go. Comparison. It is not red at all. It's orange. Yeah, the color is called Tor Red, but, well, Tor Red is famously not red. Well, it made it to Rocket. That's the good news. The weather has changed. Hopefully it makes it home. Woo! Not broken. So there you go. The 68 no longer has horrible cooling system problems. It needs more work. Those ancient tires need to go. But I've got turbo Valiants to build, so I think for now everything on the 68 is ignorable. I'm gonna do that. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm just gonna enjoy being able to drive it again. Until next time, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, don't let your car sit broken in the garage all summer. Get out there and fix it, then drive it.